Let's talk briefly about radicals, which are really roots. What you're probably familiar with is square roots or cube roots. Now, when we say a radical, we look at the number that's under the square root or the radical house, and we say, what number multiplied times itself is going to give me 16? That is a square root. If the root is not listed, if a 2 is not up there, then we know it has to be a square root. So this is the square root of 16, which we all know is 4, because 4 times 4 will give us 16. Example 2 is the square root of 64, which you know is 8. 8 times 8 would give you 64. Example 3 is the square root of 100. Well, the square root of 100 is 10. The negative sign is just stuck out front. So it would be negative 10 would be your answer for that. The negative had nothing to do with the square root of 100. It was just in front of it. Example 4 is a little more difficult. The square root is negative. They want the square root of negative 4. Now, you can't take the square root of a negative number because nothing times itself is going to give you a negative. A negative times a negative would be a positive, and a positive times a positive would be a positive. So this one is really not one we're going to do. It's called an imaginary number. It's usually represented by the letter I. But the square root of a negative is not something we can do. Now, if we have a fraction, as in number 5, we would take the square root of the numerator and the square root of the denominator. And that, of course, would be 3/25, or 3 over 25. Example 6 for a decimal. Remember, we want something that multiplied times itself would give us 0.49. Well, we know that 49, the square root of 49 is 7, but I need 2 decimal places in my answer. So I'm going to have one decimal place in my square root, my root, because I would say 0.7 times 0.7 to give me the 2 decimal places that I need. Example 7 takes us into cube roots. Now, I've asked you to memorize some of them, and 125 was one of them. The cube root of 125, you should know, is 5. 5 times 5 times 5 would give me 125. The cube root of negative 27, well, the cube root of 27 is 3. Cube roots of negatives are possible, aren't they? Because I can say a negative times a negative times a negative. 3 negatives will give me a negative. So if I multiply an odd number of negatives, I can get a negative. The cube root of negative 27 would be negative 3. Where square roots of negatives are not possible, cube roots of negatives are. In example 9, I want the cube root of the variable. Now, the way I do this is I divide the exponent by the cube root, the 3. So I'm going to say a to the 6. 6 divided by 3 will give me 2. b to the 18 divided by 3 will give me 6. And that will be the cube root of a to the 6, b to the 18th. The same thing applies to number 10. The cube root of negative 27 is, as we saw before, negative 3. Cube root of a to the 6, we're going to divide that 6 by 3 and get a squared. The cube root of b to the 30th, we'll divide that 30 by 3, and we'll get b to the power of 10. It's just an easy, simple way to do cubes of variables.